Good morning and welcome to Grace Point. My name is Murphy Gill. My wife and I have been a part of Grace Point for almost 2 years now, and we love it. We have found home, and we hope that you have as well. So whether you're just joining us online, whether you're somewhere from around the world, we know we have quite a few folks from all over the world, all around the United States and all over the world. We are so excited that you're here today, or whether you've been a long-time Grace Point person, we just want to welcome you to church today. We're beginning, actually last week it began, the new series that Pastor Josh is bringing us called Bible Stories for Grown-Ups. I'm pretty excited about the one he's doing this week. I won't give any of it away, let you just watch. But we hope that you have a wonderful time today, and this speaks to your heart. I want to let you know, if you have not signed up to receive our weekly email communication, you can do that at gracepoint.net/subscribe. So now, welcome to the church.
Welcome to Grace Point.
We are a progressive Christian church,
loving our community by gathering in our homes.
Even as we practice social distancing,
We're asking big questions about what it means to be human,
What it means to love our neighbors,
and what it means to follow Christ.
We're cultivating a safe virtual space to deconstruct or reconstruct,
to question and to grow.
We are welcoming, affirming, and fully inclusive.
because who you are and who you love are celebrated here.
While we may be physically apart from one another,
We believe we're never truly alone.
You are never alone.
We're together in this.
We're together in this. So even though we can't give you a hug just yet,
We want you to know that you are beloved.
You are included.
and you are affirmed.
Welcome to Grace Point.
Welcome to Grace Point.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Good morning, Grace Point. It is so good to see you today. Whether this is your millionth time or whether this is your first time, we are so glad you're here. If you are joining us for the first time, wherever you are in the world and whenever you're engaging with this, I hope you find it to be meaningful and I hope you feel right at home. Before we jump into the gathering this morning, I wanted to take just a minute to update you on the music and arts director position here at Grace Point. Last week, Shelley announced her resignation from the role. And I just want to, before we talk about that, the role, I just want to say how much I have enjoyed working with Shelley. What an incredible job she's done over the last almost year of creating meaningful gatherings, creating moments we'll never forget, of really curating those well. And so Shelley, I'm grateful for you, our community's so grateful for you and the beautiful work that you've done. And you have, it's been incredible. Thank you. So as we think about hiring the position, the next person who's going to step in and serve in that way, a few things to know on the front end. First, it's a part-time position. And so that's currently what we have budgeted. That's currently what we're able to do is hire this as a part-time position. Some keys that will be needed for this role. Obviously, being able to sing and being able to lead are really important. But Sunday morning isn't the only specific thing. One of the things that goes into the gatherings is that the music and arts director curates them, which means that she decides what to put where and what elements. And so whether it's in person or as we've been doing this virtually, we've experienced some really meaningful gatherings, and that's up to Shelley. She's arranging the pieces and putting them in the most impactful spot so that the service has the most impact, transformational impact. And so we need somebody who knows how to do that, who has this ability to curate meaningful gatherings, somebody who can work with our volunteers. And we have a pretty good base of volunteers in our music and arts department. And so being able to work with volunteers well. And then another really, really important piece of that is, at Grace Point, we're a progressive Christian church, which means that sometimes we don't sing certain things because we can't sing them with integrity. And so from time to time, what that means is making adjustments and knowing, gosh, this song isn't right for our community because this song brings an ethos that our community doesn't share and isn't about. So that's some of the pieces that go into what this role is and why it's vital. The process is going to look like we're going to open it up and we're going to post it online. It's going to be on our website. And we'll have sort of the little ad that describes the position. And then we'll have a job description, and we'll be funneling and pushing anybody who's interested to our website to be a part of that. We'll be accepting resumes and links, video links, to then go and watch somebody do what they do from August 10th, which is tomorrow, through September 14th. So just a little over 30 days. We'll get those resumes in, we'll get those video links in, and we'll begin the process of sorting out who might work, who might not work, all that stuff that goes into hiring a position. And I want to say too, Shelley's last Sunday is next week. So on the 23rd, Ricky Brady will be joining us as our interim music and arts director. Ricky's been around Grace Point for a little over a year. Ricky's incredibly talented, and Ricky has experience in creating gatherings, curating gatherings. And so we're excited to have him join us for this time of transition. And we also know, Ricky is gifted and talented, and our musicians are gifted and so creatively talented. And so we're going to continue to offer some meaningful opportunities, meaningful gatherings for us all to connect. So if you haven't said thank you to Shelley yet, I really would encourage you to do that. And welcome Ricky in this role as our interim music and arts director. We're thrilled to have him, and we're looking forward to what this next season, what this next opportunity brings to Grace Point. So glad you're here. Thanks for joining us for our gathering today. I'll see you in just a bit.
We found love that never runs dry, from the depths to the sky. Eyes fixed on the one who knows no end. Your love goes on. Your love goes on. Ever our heart will see your love in everything. From sky to ocean deep, your love goes on. Through every rise and fall, we are forever yours. One thing we know is sure, your love goes on and on and on. From dawn break into the night, you're here with us. You're on our side. Your arms are forever open wide. You stand strong for all of time. In the joy, in the trial, you are the beginning and the end. Your love goes on. Your love goes on. Ever our heart will see your love in everything. From skies to oceans deep, your love goes on. Through every rise and fall, we are forever yours. One thing we know is sure, your love goes on and on and on. Your love unfailing, never shaken. Hope awakens in you. 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 Ever our heart will see your love in everything. From skies to oceans deep, your love goes on. Through every rise and fall, we are forever yours. One thing we know is sure, your love goes on and on and on. Ever our heart will see your love in everything. From skies to oceans deep, your love goes on. Through every rise and fall, we are forever yours. One thing we know is sure, your love goes on and on and on.
Good morning, Grace Point kids, and good morning, Grace Point youth. I hope each of you have had a week sprinkled with stellar moments. Seriously. GPK, I hope you will join us this Saturday and every Saturday at 10 a.m. for a Zoom hangout. This week, we are starting our Zoom hangout with a story, Mira and the Big Story, written by Laura Allery. We're also going to discuss what we learned and created as we explored this week's discussion guide, and we'll end with a game. I hope you will join the fun. Our GPY hangout is moving to Thursdays at 6:30 p.m. For info about our GPY and GPK Zoom hangouts and the GPY Discord, check out our Instagrams at Grace Point Youth TN and Grace Point Kids TN. GPY, if you are watching, join us on the GPY Discord Sunday Chit Chat channel, where we are discussing Pastor Josh's message and the gathering happenings in real time. Our GPY discussion guide will be shared on Discord as well as on Instagram and Facebook this afternoon. Over the next 4 weeks, GPK will utilize Jail Creative's Tell Me a Story, the Parables of Jesus curriculum to inspire our weekly discussion guides. We explore what a parable is and how Jesus used parables to spark the imagination and to encourage people to imagine and to begin to create a more just and loving world. I hope each of us are doing well. If you need anything at all, please reach out to me at lisa@gracepoint.net. Peace out, big air hugs, and so much love to each and every one of us.
Well, I just want to bring you a couple of announcements that are of things that are going on around Grace Point this week. First off, we try to encourage everybody, come check us out. Get on YouTube at 10:30. I know the service starts at 10:45. You should check us out at 10:30. It's an opportunity to chat just a little bit on there, and you can connect with some of your Grace Point friends and just have a little opportunity to connect a little. It's kind of like a virtual foyer. I don't know, maybe that's a good way to call it. It's like a virtual foyer. So come and hang out in the foyer and welcome some folks and just chat a little bit with some friends. Next thing is we have Reconstruct every Wednesday at 6:30. You can find out more about that if you go onto the website, Grace Point. And remember, Grace Point is with an E, Grace Point with an E. You can find out more on the calendar page on the website, but it's every Wednesday at 6:30. They do that through Zoom, the Zoom platform. So anyway, check it out. Grace Point, Reconstruct is a really amazing time. It's an opportunity to ask questions. It's a very frank kind of discussion. Sometimes it's just connecting, and it's just fun and enjoyable. Sometimes it's questions and answers that are difficult and tough, but that we really need to have. So it's a really great time. I would strongly encourage all of you to check it out. Next thing is the next Books and Brews that we have will be on August the 18th. We're going to be discussing the book Untamed by Glennon Doyle. So I encourage you. You can also find out more about that on the Grace Point website, Grace Point with an E, and /calendar, gracepoint.net, and then /calendar, and you can find out more about that. Last thing I want to say to you, I want to encourage you, and you've been amazing in all of this, but I want to keep this before you, encourage you to continue to remember Grace Point in your giving. There are always continuing expenses with the church, even though we don't have the rental payment at Clementine anymore. There's always lots and lots of expenses, and we, the good that we try to do in our community is something that's really important, and you can't do that without finances. So we don't like to harp on it, but we do want to keep it in before you. There's a couple of ways to do that. Right now, there's two ways. We don't really have a bucket to pass or anything like that, but there's two ways to do that. You can text Grace Point with an E to 77977. That's Grace Point to the 77977. Or you can go to our website, gracepoint.net /give, and you can give that way. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. Looking forward to the rest of the service today. So have a wonderful rest of the service. Peace.
I stand before you now, the greatness of your renown. I have heard of the majesty and wonder of you, King of heaven. In humility I bow as your love in wave after wave crashes over me, crashes over me. For you are for us, you are not against us. Champion of heaven, you I've heard the song of love that you sing. Oh, so I will let you draw me out beyond the shore into your grace. Oh, your grace and your love, and wave after wave crashes over me, crashes over me. For you are for us, you are not against us. Champion of heaven, you made a way for all to enter in. You make me brave, you make me brave. You call me out beyond the shore to the waves. You make me brave, you make me brave. No fear can hinder now the love that's made a way. You make me brave, you make me brave. You call me out beyond the shore into the waves. You make me brave, you make me brave. No fear can hinder now the love that's made a way. And your love, wave after wave, crashes over me, crashes over me. For you are for us, you are not against us. Champion of heaven, you made a way. Champion of heaven, you made a way for all to enter.
Well, good morning again, Grace Point. Last week, we began a new series called Bible Stories for Grown-Ups, the Hebrew Bible edition. And we began last week with not a Bible story, but with really just sort of laying the groundwork, talking about what does a grown-up faith look like? What does a grown-up approach to the Bible look like? And I essentially outlined three things, like pre-critical, critical, and post-critical. And I'll just recap that really quick in case you missed it. Pre-critical is essentially what we all come into the world, how we all come to the world. It's that we're not asking a lot of questions about the text. We take it at face value. We're not really engaging like in a deep way. We're just reading it and trying to draw a moral or something out of it. Then there's critical, which is what many of us would call unraveling, deconstruction. That's where that begins. And we begin asking and just sort of tearing everything down and trying to get to what happened. Is this literal? Is it not? All that sort of conversation. And then there's post-critical. And post-critical is essentially what happens when you transcend the critical, but you also include it. So you're still asking meaningful questions, you're engaging the text, you want to know what's going on there, and at the same time you're also, so it's not just an exercise of the head, it's also an exercise of the heart. And so post-critical is when you bring head and heart together and seek to wrestle with the text, wrestle with the story, and then figure out how it fits, if it fits, where it fits, and what it says about our lives. And so I want to begin this week in earnest, digging into Bible stories with a well-known story, the story of Noah and the Great Flood. It's one of the first stories kids often learn. And I realized as I was going through some of our, books we have upstairs that if somebody gives you a book, a Bible story for kids book or a little kid's Bible or something, almost all the time, like Noah is on the cover. Right, and it's this guy who's on a boat and he's got animals all around him. But when you really dig into the story, it is a very, very odd story to tell children. And the way we tell it to our kids is really sanitized. I want to show you some pictures. I just searched Noah pictures or something like that on the internet, and I got all these images of Noah, and they're all the same, like Noah and sometimes his family and all these really happy smiling animals, and they're on a boat and there's a rainbow above them and everything just looks great. It almost looks like they're on a cruise. They're just out there enjoying it. One of my favorite ones is this one that has all these lessons from Noah's Ark, and the first one is don't miss the boat, which is exactly how we approach these stories when I was a kid in Sunday school, right? The flannel graph version of this, where everything is ultra sanitized, and we talk about how good God was because God saved Noah and all the animals and his family from the flood. The problem is what you don't think about when you're seeing these images of Noah and his family and the animals on their big cruise is that everybody else in the world's dead. Every other animal in the world has been destroyed. This is it's a massive case of divinely, not only sanctioned, but divinely enacted genocide. And I think for lots of us, we hear this and we think, man, what do we do with this story? We try to make it seem like it's a nice story about God saving people, but in reality, it's a story of genocide of every living thing, save a handful of people and a few animals, and then we kind of don't know what to do. Like, what do you do with a story like this? The story of a God who wipes out life except for a few people. What do you do with this God? So before we all jump to talking about this before we get into talking about this from a grown-up post-critical perspective, I think it might be helpful just to hear the story. And so what's going to happen in a minute, I'm going to invite a couple different people to read two different versions of this story. And what I want you to think about as they're reading it, you hear one and you hear the other, which one of these stories is in the Bible? And this is when I taught Old Testament Hebrew Bible at Western Kentucky University. I don't know why it's not back there. That's my sink. I taught Hebrew Bible at Western Kentucky University, and this is an exercise I did in class, and it was a lot of fun. So I'll say this. If you are a person who's super interested in like nerding out, geeking out, digging into a text, you're going to have that itch scratched today. If you're also a person who says, gosh, I don't need all that, just tell me where it hits in my life. Tell me what I'm supposed to do with it. Give me some suggestions on what I might do with a story like this. We're going to also scratch you where you itch today too. So if you're kind of in that latter group, you're like, just get to it. This first part, hopefully you'll find some of it interesting. And so we're going to hear these two different stories read. And I want you to be thinking about which one of these stories is actually found in the Bible.
Genesis 6:5 through 8:22. The Lord saw that the wickedness of humankind was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made humankind on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the human beings I have created, people together with animals and creeping things and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in sight of the Lord. Then the Lord said to Noah, Go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you alone are righteous before me in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and its mate, and a pair of animals that are not clean, the male and its mate. And 7 pairs of birds of the air, also male and female, to keep their kind alive on the face of the earth. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground. And Noah did all that the Lord had commanded him, and Noah with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood. After 7 days, the waters of the flood came on the earth, and the rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and the Lord shut them in. The flood continued 40 days on the earth, and the waters increased and bore up the ark and rose it high above the earth. The waters swelled and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated in the face of the waters. The waters swelled so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters swelled above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. Everything on dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, human beings and animals and creeping things and birds of the air. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made, and he sent out a dove for him to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set its foot, and it returned to him to the ark. For the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put his hand and took it and brought it in the ark with him. He waited another 7 days, and again he sent out the dove from the ark, and the dove came back to him in the evening, and there in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth. Then he waited another 7 days, and sent out the dove, and it did not return to him any more. And Noah removed the covering of the ark, and looked, and saw that the face of the ground was drying. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and took every clean animal and every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing odor, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of humankind, for the inclination of the human heart is evil from youth, nor will I ever again destroy every living creature as I have done.
This is Genesis 6:9 through 8:19. These are the descendants of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God, and Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw that the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Now I am going to destroy them along with the earth. Make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above, and put the door of the ark in its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For my part, I am going to bring a flood of waters on the earth, to destroy from under heaven all flesh in which is the breath of life. Everything on the earth shall die, but I will establish my covenant with you. And you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives, with you. And of every living thing, of all flesh, ye shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind, 2 of every kind shall come into you, to keep them alive. Also take with you every kind of food that is eaten, and store it up. And it shall serve as food for you and for them. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters came on the earth. Of clean animals, and of animals that are not clean, and of birds, and of everything that creeps on the ground, 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah, as God had commanded Noah. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. On the very same day, Noah with his sons, Shem, and Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife and 3 wives of his sons entered the ark, they and every wild animal of every kind, and all domestic animals of every kind, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every bird of every kind. Every bird, every winged creature. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female, of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, domestic animals, wild animals, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all human beings. And the waters swelled on the earth for 150 days. But God remembered Noah, and all the wild animals, and all the domestic animals that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed. The rain from the heavens were restrained, and the waters gradually receded from the earth. At the end of 150 days, the waters had abated, and in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. The waters continued to abate until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st day of the month, the tops of the mountains appeared, and he sent out the raven, and it went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. In the 601st year, in the 1st month, on the 1st day of the month, the waters were dried up from the earth. In the 2nd month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. Then God said to Noah, "Go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing that is with you of all flesh, birds and animals and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, so that they may abound on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth." So Noah went out with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives, and every animal, every creeping thing, and every bird, everything that moves on the earth, went out of the ark by families.
Thanks, Greg and Emily. I appreciate so much you all reading those for us. So which one of those is found in the Bible? And if you want to just go in the chat there, then just write one or two, story one or story two. Now, before we move on, I want to maybe help you, because when you read those things, sometimes it goes a little quick. So I want to just sort of give you a synopsis of several key things that each story said. The first story called the deity, the God character. And I think it's important to know that this is a God character. This is how people were perceiving God. And so we can talk more about that at another point. But the God character is called the Lord. And Lord is capital L-O-R-D. It stands for the name Yahweh, which is the personal name that God gives to Moses in the book of Exodus. The reason for the flood, the cause, was that the wickedness of humankind was great in the earth, and that every inclination of their thoughts, the thoughts of their hearts, was only evil continually. When it comes to the animals, there were 7 pairs of clean animals, 1 pair of unclean animals. The rain happened for 40 days and 40 nights. At the end, Noah sent out some doves that brought back an olive branch that let him know that it was safe. And when Noah and his family and all the animals leave the ark, they offer a sacrifice to God. Yahweh, God, the Lord smells the pleasing odor of the sacrifice and commits to never again curse the ground because of humankind. For the inclination of the human heart is evil from youth, nor will I ever again destroy every living creature as I have done. So that's the first story. The second story, the God character in this story is called God. But actually, that's the Hebrew word. It's the word Elohim. And that was a particular understanding of God, particular name of God, specifically in Canaanite religions. The cause was that the earth was corrupt and filled with violence. There are instructions for building the ark. There are 2 of every kind of animal. Here come the animals 2 by 2. That's like a child's song, right? Has anybody heard that? The rat-a-tat-tat, thump-thump-thump, Noah built a great big ark. Maybe that was just something I learned. Every kind of food gets loaded up on this one. And then it doesn't rain. The flood doesn't come from the rain. It says the fountains of the great deep burst forth and the windows of heaven were opened. Now, in ancient cosmology, the way they assumed things were is that you had like earth, which was on pillars, and then you had, water beneath, and you had like a dome of the sky, and then the sky was essentially holding back water. And there were windows in the sky that would open, and that's where the rain came from, right? So this is that ancient cosmological understanding of creation. And so when this flood happens, it's because the great deep burst forth and the windows of the heaven were opened. The flood lasted for 150 days. Noah sends out a raven at the end, and we didn't get to this part, but at the end, God Elohim makes a covenant with Noah and humankind, and at the end, there's God talks about the rainbow. The rainbow as a sign that God would never again do what God just did. So which story, if you're on a game show and this is the $1 million question, which story is the account found in the Bible? Okay, I'm going to give you the answer. Both. Both of those stories are found in the Bible. There are 2 different accounts from 2 different sources, 2 different writers, that were stitched together by, in scholarship circles, they call them redactors. We might say an editor. And so what's interesting is the way the editor stitched the stories together, because the details, it's not like there's a story and a story. It's that there are these 2 stories, and this editor somehow brings them together. And we tend to, at least me, hearing the songs, doing the flannel graph, I was never aware. But when I actually go to the text and read it, it's evident that there are 2 different Noah stories, 2 different flood stories here. And there's something interesting about the fact that you have 2 different, it's the same at the beginning of Genesis, there are 2 different creation narratives. And what our ancient spiritual ancestors did is they had 2 different stories with 2 different details. And what we would have done is said, well, which one's the right one? Which one's the one we want to preserve? What this editor did is say, this, for two different groups of people, this story matters. And so we're going to bring them together. We're going to preserve them. We're going to make them both part of this narrative we're telling. They wanted to preserve both accounts because it mattered. The communities that produced them, these stories mattered. Now, these two sources are known in scholarship as, and there are other sources, but these two specifically. One is known as the Yahwist because it calls God Yahweh all the time. And another one is known as the priestly. And the priestly has other features, but one of the features is that before Exodus, chapter 3, I think, don't hold me to that, but the priestly source calls God Elohim. So you have two different authors, a Yahwist, a person who primarily talks about God as Yahweh, and then you have this other source who, at this point, is talking about God as Elohim, and they both come together. So what do you do with that? How do you approach a story like this, stories like this, in a post-critical, grown-up way that actually values scholarship, and you want to know what's going on, but it also values the fact that the human heart needs to be involved. It needs to be engaged. That ultimately, it's not just satisfying if our brains are happy. We need our hearts happy too. So I want to begin by saying this. The story of Noah, and I bet many of you know this, the story of Noah is not unique within the ancient Near Eastern world. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, and if you think about Gilgamesh, it was written around 1800 BCE. The story that calls God Yahweh was written around 950 BCE, and the priestly story that calls God Elohim was written around 550 BCE. So it's Gilgamesh by a long stretch, and almost 1,000 years. And then you have the Yahwist, and then about 400-ish years later, you have the priestly. So these sources are all... So the older story is the Epic of Gilgamesh. And I'm sure everybody's got that memorized, but just in case you don't, here's sort of the Cliff Notes. The gods decide to destroy all human life. And one of them, named A, spills the beans to a man named Utnapishtim, and he tells him to build a boat to keep living beings alive, and he gives him the dimensions of the boat, which actually contained 6 decks. It literally was the Carnival cruise of the ancient world. And so the gods send a storm, and the storm lasts for 7 days. Eventually the storm subsides. Utnapishtim sends out a dove and a swallow, both of which return. He finally sends a raven, and the raven doesn't return. And then he offers a sacrifice, and he and his wife are granted immortality. Do you see at least some echoes? Right, there's some echoes in both of those stories. The Gilgamesh echoes exist. Now, what I find really interesting is what is the why? Why does the deluge come? Why does God in Genesis, or Yahweh in Genesis, why do those gods send the rain, send the flood? And then why do the gods in Gilgamesh? Listen to this line from Gilgamesh. In those days, the world teemed, the people multiplied, the world bellowed like a wild bull. And the great God was aroused by the clamor. Enlil heard the clamor, and he said to the gods in council, the uproar of mankind is intolerable, and sleep is no longer possible by reason of the Babel. So the gods agreed to exterminate mankind, humankind. In Gilgamesh, why do they send the flood? Because these people are so darn noisy. We can't get any sleep. Every time we try to go to sleep, they wake up and they make noise and they make it impossible. Why can't God get a good nap anymore, right? And so they decide to wipe out all of creation. And one of the gods feels bad and he sort of spills the beans. Now, if you then come to the book of Genesis, the shift made in these stories, the two versions of the Noah story in Genesis, it isn't that this God is capricious and that this God is angry and that this God can't get a good nap, so this God wants to wipe everybody out. That's not the thing. Instead, this God is responding to a critical disintegration of humanity. And we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. What does a grown-up faith do with a story like this? It probably doesn't build a large replica of the ark and insist we take it very literally, and then, or the other option is would you just brush it off as some sort of ancient mythology that isn't deserving of our time or our energy? I mean, this story continues. It endures because our ancestors found something in it that resonated with their experiences. So while we may not embrace their explanations, I think we have to continually come back to this. We may not embrace their explanations, but we can see their experiences as a doorway and an invitation for us to have our own experiences, right? We're deeply interested in their experiences. We're not always interested in, we need to hear them, but we're not always finding their explanations credible. So a few grown-up takeaways from this story for me. The flood narratives mark a step forward in how God is understood. And that is a process that needs to continue with us. Freezing our conception of God with this story, which is the way many of us were taught to approach it and to do it, right? It is theological and anthropological malpractice. It is deeply unfair to God and it is deeply unfair to people. A God who is willing to commit genocide isn't one we want to spend an eternity with, right? Much less the brief time we have here on earth. I don't think that either of the writers of these stories expected us to freeze what the concept of the word God means. I think they were expressing sort of a transforming in their own understanding of what the word God means. If our understanding of God stops growing and changing, it doesn't mean we finally arrived at the fullest and best understanding. It likely means that we're not growing and transforming. It likely means that we've gotten too comfortable, too complacent, and too settled. It likely means that we've ended up with a God who preserves our privilege and protects our ego, and so we don't want to push that boundary. But the reality is, the God behind that God, the God you want to freeze and keep in place, the God that I want because it's comfortable and it's reassuring to me, the God on the other side of that is much more wild and untamable. That is a God that is willing to make us uncomfortable and to bust through our boundaries and to bust through the sort of the ideological pillars we've set up and all the ways we divided the world up. This God wants to draw us out of those and into something new, something beautiful, and something even more human than we've been. The God who is willing to commit genocide isn't worth our time. But these ancient ancestors of ours, they did not stay with the God of Gilgamesh. They didn't just like cut and paste the Gilgamesh stuff verbatim. They made some critical changes. The flood narratives are actually about the disintegration of creation. The disintegration. Think about this. The first part of Genesis is, in the beginning, there were God created the heavens and the earth, and then God says, let there be light, and there's light, and then there's land, and there's sky, and there's animals, and then there's people, and there's all of this creation. It's all integrated and a part. It's this one beautiful whole. And what the flood narrative sort of, the picture they paint is that creation that was all together is now rupturing and being torn apart. Essentially, back the primordial waters, right? The water above and water below, the primordial waters that creation held back. The disintegration of creation has allowed them to flow back in. A creation that was whole is now disintegrated. That feels like this, that sort of moment, it feels like this moment, doesn't it? We're in the middle of a pandemic that has killed more than 700,000 people globally. Here in the U.S., the death toll is, I think I heard maybe this morning that it was north of 159,000 people. In a moment that should see us come together as human beings, regardless of all the other categories or ways we're divided, we have a shared humanity that could bind us, and yet that's not what's happening in many places, in many contexts. Our shared existence is actually being threatened by the anger and hatred that are so prevalent in our society. Our worship of independence at any cost, as opposed to seeing that we are really interdependent, that we need each other. It is killing us, and it's threatening this existence we share. I think I've mentioned before, I love flying. One of the things I've missed about during this quarantine has been not being on an airplane. It's strange. I'm really, really terrified of heights, like really, really terrified. Like I remember a couple years ago, Carla and I took Cohen to amusement park, and I'd never ridden a Ferris wheel, and he hadn't, so they wanted to do that. And I remember I just sat there, and of course it's rocking, and I just sort of did this number against the rail and closed my eyes, made the mistake of opening it once at the top. Did not make that mistake again. I'm not a heights person, but I love flying. When I'm on a flight that has, so you go on a flight, and when it's one of those flights that has different sections, so there's first class, there's economy or coach or whatever you want to call it. I always find it funny because when we enter the plane, everybody goes through the first class. Because people who are in first class are like sitting there drinking their champagne and like, being like, get the riffraff out of first class. So what's interesting though is that once we get in there and we get our seats in the more cramped, no frills in the back, the flight attendants start this spiel about what to do if the airplane starts to crash or loses cabin pressure. Then at some point, as we're about to take off, they reach over and they unhook this little mesh sort of looking sheer see-through curtain, and this curtain now separates first class from economy or coach or whatever you're going to call it. It's sort of like the Holy of Holies now, right? But here's what's interesting. If this plane crashes, everyone's in trouble. The curtain can give us a sense of boundary and separation, but we're still connected. All of our lives are connected and what happens to that plane matters to each and every one of us very, very deeply. Our fates are intricately intertwined. And that's true of all the time, right now, in this world, as we live out our existence right here on planet Earth. We are specks of dust riding a bigger speck of dust that is hurtling around the sun. And what happens on this planet, what happens in this world, it affects me, and it affects you, and it affects everybody, people we've never even met before. There's 7 billion of us, and we're tied together in really deep ways. I think the story could also be read as a way that calls us to action when it comes to our role as gardeners and caretakers of creation. Because rising sea levels are actually threatening to make this story a reality in our own time. The human calling has always been to tend creation. And when we take care of the earth takes care of us. But when we inflict pain on the earth is not able to provide for us and take care of us in the ways that we need. And I think the other meaning, one of the other important meanings to these stories, it's that if we don't change our ways, violence will overtake us like a flood and threaten our shared existence. I think that's what's interesting in this story is that the reason, it's not because the gods are cranky and you're waking them up. The reason stated, give or take in both, is that human violence and human corruption was threatening creation. And I think part of what this story can mean for us is that if we don't find a better way to deal with our troubles and our issues and our problems with each other, if we still keep leaning on violence as being the number one way we try to solve our disagreements, it is possible that violence can wipe out all of our shared existence. What is the point of having a nuclear arsenal that can blow the world up 12 times over? You're not going to get to use them all anyway, right? But we have a problem, a human problem. It's deep within our psyche. It's deep within our fight or flight. It's deep within the lizard brain. And it actually is part of why it's part of why Homo sapiens survived. And it's also now the thing that threatens our survival. And I think this idea of the violence overtaking us as personal and political, and by political I mean how we order our common life. Everything is essentially political in that way. So let's start with the political, because that'd be the most fun. I did some searching on the internet. The U.S. defense budget, a couple weeks ago, Congress approved $738 billion for the 2020 Department of Defense budget. America spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. So the next 10 countries combined in 2019 spent $726 billion. The next 10 biggest military countries in the world. We spent more than all of them together. The United States budget for education in 2019 was $72.8 billion. Right, $738 billion versus $72.8 billion. Part of the reason for this is that America has been engaged in war for 227 out of our 244-year history. That's 93% of our existence as a country. We've been engaged in the trauma of violence. I know budgets are complicated. I get that. I've done some advocacy work with one campaign where we go and we talk about budgets and that sort of thing with representatives. I also know there are committees and negotiations, and there's a whole other set of gymnastics to get our leaders to talk to one another. But even so, a budget is a moral document. And I also know that Jesus said, where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be also. And I think we as a country, and it sort of exists like at the us level as a country, but I think it's sort of seeped down into us as individuals. We've bought into this myth of redemptive violence, that if we can just defeat, conquer, bomb, whatever, then we're going to win. And actually, when we choose to live by the sword, we die by the sword. We also live in a country where we have an unbelievable amount of mass shootings. As of August 4th, this past week, there were a total of 347 shootings that fit this criteria this year. There were 59 mass shootings in May alone, the highest monthly total reported since the Gun Violence Archive began keeping track of the data in 2013. And balance this with this. The other day on Twitter, I happened to see the NRA tweet, RT if you love guns. Is that the word you use? RT if you love guns? Love like I love my family? Love like I love my community? Like, do I love guns? That is, I think, a deep reflection of where we are societally, where we have bought into the myth of redemptive violence. But beyond budgets and violence from sort of a macro level, there's the threat of interpersonal violence in which we participate. And it's a threat to our well-being. And violence, by the way, isn't just a physical act. I have a friend who I was in my master's program with, and she did a whole thing on rhetorical violence, right? The dehumanizing and devaluing and demeaning ways we communicate. Rhetorical violence, word violence, language violence, the way we gossip, the way we tear down, the way we use our words to inflict wounds on others. And you know, we have the whole sticks and stones, break my bones, words will never hurt me. Words will absolutely gut you. And we often use our words in the way to the most. And listen, as a person who not dabbles in sarcasm, but finds it really comes really easy. It's a constant thing for me to realize that everything in my brain right now doesn't need to be said in this moment. I do that during sermons too, by the way. It may not seem like it, but I do. But what about the ways, and I think you can make an argument that violence never gets up to the macro level. It never gets up to 227 years or whatever a country being in warfare. It all begins in the rhetorical level. It begins in conversation. It begins in the way we talk to people and the way people talk to us. Before it is in words, before it's in flesh, violence begins in words. What would it look like for us as individuals, families, communities, countries, as a species, to reject the path of violence in favor of a more compassionate existence? We are quite literally together in this. There is no planet B. There is no redo. There is no mulligan. There is no way to hit the reset button and start over. Actually, that reminded me when I was a kid. We got, I don't know why I remember this. We got my dad a Nintendo for his Father's Day present in 1984. And it stayed in my room, which I was fine with. Eventually, it stayed in my room. And me and my dad used to play Tecmo Bowl together. And I don't know if anybody's going to remember that, but it was like one of the first football games on a game station like that. And apparently, I have some foggy memories of this. One of the things I would do is if Dad started beating me, I would just accidentally reset the game, and we would start all over. There is no reset for this. This is our planet. If this plane goes down, we all go with it. Perhaps the Noah story should cause us to use our voices to call for peace, to work for a more peaceful society and world, which, of course, is going to begin right here in my heart and in your heart and in my life and your life and in my words and your words. What if we could stem the tide? What if the flood that is coming toward us, the flood of violence, the flood of war, the flood of climate change, the flood of hatred, what if we can actually stem the tide? And what if, as we read stories like this one, instead of just tossing it aside and saying it has no value, what if we see the creative ways? I mean, the writers of these stories knew the Gilgamesh story. They included some details. But what's fascinating is what they change. That God is essentially, in this story, it's still, like, genocide is still bad, right? If you let this story speak to you on a non-literal level, the flood is coming. And in this story, it is not divine violence that precipitates it. Actually, it's human violence. So what do we do? How do we become aware? How do we use our voices? How do we engage? I think that's where it begins. It begins at a very personal level. And I think you could argue that what's playing out on our news channels every single night of the week did not begin there. It actually started around conversations. It started around moments of frustration. It started in moments of interpersonal conflict that actually then grow and become a flood. There's some parts of the Noah story. You could take the character of God out of it, right? Because I don't think that God actually goes around committing genocide. I think God's very different than that. But I think this story has something to say. And if we're willing to engage it, if we're willing to do it in a post-critical, grown-up sort of way, then this can offer us some warnings and maybe even some hope. Right? These stories end with God going, it doesn't have to happen. Doesn't have to happen. Will not happen again. This doesn't have to be on repeat. But what will determine that is what we do, how we choose to engage, how we choose to live, how we choose to not just do to them what they've done to us. And we'll jump into some more of that over the coming weeks of this series. We live in a world threatened by violence, but we also live in a world with creative human beings. And sometimes we use that creativity to kill each other. But what if we use that creativity to transform the world? What if we use that creativity to continue the fight against all sorts of disease and all sorts of, like what if we invested more of our money in healing than in destruction? That could change the world. So no, I wouldn't tell this story to my kids. I don't tell the story to my kids. I don't depict it with this happy guy with a bunch of animals. What I do see though is I see the future that we might be heading toward, and I also see the opportunity to change that future. So I hope you'll join. I hope together as a community we can begin to model. What does that look like? What does it look like to take very, very seriously what you're saying, how you're engaging, and what you're doing in the world? Once again, Grace Point, thank you so much for being with us today. Each week now after the gathering, we put out some questions, some conversation starters, some things that are connected to the sermon. And so if you want to go find those, we'd love for you to comment on them with maybe your observations, or send me an email, or however you want to, or just take them and think about them. Like whatever you want to do with them, they're going to be there, and I hope they're helpful. So next week, we're going to jump into another really strange story. A story of a guy named Abraham and his son Isaac, and it's, I don't even want to spoil it. So hopefully you'll be back here with us next week. Look forward to engaging in more Bible stories for grown-ups. Until then, Grace Point, we love you, and may grace and peace be with you.
you.